Greetings, fellow Earthlings, and welcome to A Raging Atheist. I'm your host tonight, John Petersen, sitting in for Nakasuchi. And tonight we are going to talk about Norse mythology. And I want to thank Nakasuchi for allowing me to do this once a week. I want to let you know that after the broadcast, I'll be on Nakasuchi's Discord server for like maybe a half hour, 45 minutes for an after show. If anybody wants to come over there and ask any questions, and anybody that's here tonight is free to come over too. I believe everybody here has received an invite to Nakasuchi's Discord server. If not, let me know, folks, and we'll get one out to you. And I want to start by saying congratulations to Digital Hammurabi. They just reached 10,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Thank you very much.
And well on their way to 100,000. They had a little broadcast the other day that kind of was a surprise to me. I got a notification, and 10K at Digital Hammurabi. And I also want to mention that Saturday on the Great Debate Community, I'll be having an afternoon stream. We will be joined by Anger Spread Thin. We'll be the feature channel of the week, talk about her YouTube channels. And I've sent some invites out. Topic Thunder is already confirmed being there. And I'm going to try and have it all either people from the UK or Europe. We'll have a European invasion Saturday afternoon on the GDC. Sunday on my channel, The Amateur Conversationalist, I'm going to be joined by Dragnaut Silvis. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about yet. We haven't ironed that out. As I said, tonight we're going to talk about Norse mythology. We're joined by History Unsettled, Jerry and Misha Griffith, and we're joined by Digital Hammurabi, Josh Bowen, and Megan Lewis. And we are also joined by Calon, one of the hosts of what's that?
I said hello.
Oh, hello. One of the hosts of Polyology, another YouTube channel you should be checking out right now. Jerry and Misha came up with the idea for this stream a few months back. We did a stream called Monster Mythos on Jim Major's channel, and after this post is a video, I'll link to that in the comments or in the description, so you can go check that out if you'd like. That was also the Griffiths, and Josh and Megan joined me for that Monster Mythos. I also want to mention an idea that was brought to me by Misha, and it sounds like a wonderful idea to me, so we're going to try this out. Probably the first one won't be until October, but Misha suggested that we have a once-a-month Monster Mythos stream. And like for the first one, she suggested that we all read Shelley's Frankenstein.
Which, for the record, is one of my favorite books. I love that
awesome book.
Yeah, and absolutely. And as I said to her, it's probably been decades since I read that. But as soon as she sent that idea to me, I got on Overdrive, which is an app that links to my local library, and I borrowed the ebook. And so I've got that to read this weekend. So be looking for more about that later. That's a feature we're going to try. And we'll maybe, sometimes we'll do it on this channel. Maybe other times we'll do it on the Great Debate Community channel. And everybody that's here tonight, you're certainly welcome to join us for that. Now, to get started, I'm going to throw it to Jerry and Misha for a couple of minutes, let them frame the conversation. Jerry sent us all an outline of the things he wanted to talk about, and Calon is a polytheist and an expert on Norse mythology. Myself, Josh and Megan are the neophytes in the crowd tonight, so we'll be asking lots of questions, and I'm sure that perhaps Josh and Megan, might have some points to make as far as any similarities to some of the Christian, well, I'm calling it mythology. My apologies to the theists in the audience.
It's a safe place.
No,
This is a safe space, John.
You can use the term mythology because technically the Big Bang is also a myth. Myth is just simply something that explains things. It doesn't necessarily imply truth or falsity.
I want to jump into that and say myth has got multiple meanings, but the idea of falsehood is a relatively small one. A myth is also something, a story, and this really comes out of Norse mythology. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. But a myth is often a story that illustrates a moral lesson or a social value in a way that's important. And that doesn't mean whether it's true or not. It's just that it's part of what a myth is. So yes, I think Christian myths is not necessarily offensive to Christians. It shouldn't be anyway.
Hope not.
No, I say mythos all the time. So, yeah.
Excellent.
So, like I said, we'll let Jerry and Misha open up for a few minutes and talk about the outline that Jerry provided us with and what direction we're going to go in, and of course Calon can interject whenever she would like. I'm going to kind of lay back, and I have thrust Josh and Megan into the role of driving the bus here as much as they can. Since they're in the same situation as me of not knowing much about this, so I'm sure they'll have lots of questions. And when I have a question, I'll stick my nose in there, or my snout, as it were, with the horse icon there. So go right ahead, Jerry and Misha.
Okay, I want to start by saying that we're not experts on this. I'm certainly not an expert on Norse mythology. You aren't either, although you teach history of Western civilization, so you know a lot about the Varangians and the whole subculture. But this area is actually fairly new to me, and I was a little intimidated about jumping into this, but John was pretty pushy. It's like one of those things you have a conversation, they say, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, but once you started reading it, you found that the whole the entire the Eddas.
Oh yes.
And the Skald.
The Sklods.
The Sklods.
Skalds.
We're going to slaughter a lot of words tonight, folks.
Sorry.
Okay. But one of the things I was trying to get
I can be here to correct.
Thank you. By way of first introduction is I can see in the live stream that there are people here who probably know aspects of this that we don't.
Right.
Calon, you might know a lot more, but we're just kind of winging it. So please, if we say something and somebody says, no, Odin was left-handed, that's okay. I never heard that
Actually,
Odin
he was
left-handed.
ambidextrous, Jerry.
We're done. Thank you.
No, the whole idea is to have a whole bunch of us here to gather a whole bunch of knowledge. I think that's
yes, but the point I'm trying to make
the joy
to our
about
audience
doing
is
it
if you're
as a
tuning
group.
in thinking you're getting a bunch of
Norse experts,
with the possible exception of Calon, and we don't really know much about her background except that she's a polytheist. And Calon, would you tell us a little more about yourself and what you believe, so that if I don't offend somebody by saying, Odin was fat or had to pluck out his own eye, stuff like that,
Yeah, so I am a Norse. Norse is one of my traditions. The other tradition is Sumerian. And, well, basically, I hold that, theologically, sort of the beginning was with Ymir, the death of Ymir in particular. And that was kind of like a Big Bang. Then you have heat flying into Muspelheim and various other positions like that. I am, though, very flexible with my position, so it's all subject to change. And, yeah, I do hold that Odin exists, as
Ymir
well
was
as Thor.
Okay. You hold that they exist. Now, if I can push you a little bit on this, physical entities, spiritual entities, representations,
Spiritual disembodied minds.
Okay.
Roughly.
Okay.
Probably, most likely extra dimensional. That is to say, transcendent and immanent.
Well, there's 9 worlds, so there's room for everybody.
That number 9, that is an interesting number in Norse mythology.
Yeah, it comes up a lot. Wait
a minute. The number 9 is interesting in Norse mythology. Hey, I'm just saying, I only have 9 fingers. I'm missing the thumb on my left hand. So,
all right.
Maybe it's a sign.
According to one source that one of the few pagan sources, or few sources describing pagan Norse religion, there was a tradition called the Grand Desir, where they would every 9 years sacrifice
in Uppsala.
9 people.
Mm-hmm. Only 9 people, but 9 of pretty much every kind of animal. hmm
And then they partied.
Pretty
The
much.
sacrifices were places where you could eat a lot. So I wanted to start by telling the audience now, and again, Calon, this is where I'm possibly going to step on toes a little bit. Since I can't see your toes, I'll assume they're
I'm not a toad. I'm just a snake.
okay. We don't have good sources of Norse mythology. We really, truly don't. We don't have, as a religion, we don't have very many.
So there is one
very-
little thing I will take issue with,
Okay.
and
I
that
said
is
many. I'm
that,
trying to use weasel words, but go ahead.
and that is that you're kind of saying you're talking a little bit about it as if it's like a monolith.
Mhm.
A little bit. We're talking like good couple hundred years. So while yes, the statement is true, it mostly pertains to like pre-Edic stuff, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, but I'm not sure if it does to our audience. I was going to explain what the Eddas were
Oh, okay.
in
Go
just
ahead.
the next second. But and yes, the very fact that this was big stories that varied, and we find the same stories, different endings and different characters popping up, and so it's not monolithic, very much
Right.
as Calon says.
And it's explained very much by the fact that we're not dealing with a single group of people. We're dealing with Vandals and
Aspects of this
Icelandics
religion were covered
and
everywhere,
Saxon
from
and
the Arctic
Angles,
Circle to the
yeah.
Mediterranean
Yeah.
to Russia, all over England at
Right.
times. I mean, it was
They
very
laid siege to Paris, after all.
Yeah. So you had a real wide variety of people in different groups.
Well, there are Viking settlements in Spain.
Yeah.
And we have seen evidence or seen plaques that says there was a Viking settlement
Right.
here. That's how I know.
There is a Viking settlement in Canada.
Yep.
Greenland.
Yes. Yes,
Yep.
of course.
So, yeah,
But
and
that
Greenland.
was settled by a Christian Viking, just so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The later
unfortunately.
Vikings.
Okay. So one of the problems we have is that much of our, and I'm using weasel words here very carefully, we have a few period sources from believers and from people of the time, but most of the stuff that we have as a culture that we have read and learned about this has come through sources that were Icelandic specifically and Christian authors.
Because
I just want
Please.
to also add, there is one more source that we also have, and that is toponyms, place names. Place names
What's
are
that?
a huge aspect.
place
Place
names,
names?
yes.
Place
Yeah.
names,
Are a
okay.
huge
Oh, yes.
part of reconstructing Old Norse
Yes.
religion as best as we can.
And we
Still
also
a lot
have
more
some
than what
runes.
we have
Yeah.
in Celtic.
Yeah, and see, this is right down Dr. Josh and Megan's avenue, is that we're dealing with all sorts of different sources, and so it's the sources themselves that we have to crack open and take a look at, not just what they say, but how they say it and how they were transmitted, because so much of this tradition was oral.
But most of what we have that we read when you go on to things, when you look at stuff, comes to us through the Eddas, which are two works.
Eddas and place names.
We'll call it two. Okay, all right. But much of the stories we have and the versions and the descriptions, and I'm saying much. I'm trying to be careful, Calon, so I'm not saying all. But most of these were compiled in Iceland in the 13th century, which is 200 years after Iceland was totally Christianized. The primary source for many of the tales that are told is something called the Prose Edda, which was written by Snorri Sturluson.
Snorri.
Sturluson. Yes.
Great name.
Which, by the way, he did not. We only know that he wrote the Prose Edda. The actual
Right.
Poetic Edda itself has, especially when you look at the Norse language itself, it has vestiges of stuff that indicates that it was actually earlier, particularly in Grimnismol and Vafrufnismol.
Especially because, as I said, they're an oral tradition. The stories and the poetry are from, and the songs were from an oral tradition. When you think of the runes were not something, as far as I understood, that they actually wrote the poetry in. The rune was kind of like the hieroglyphs. Well, kind of like the hieroglyphs that the Egyptians used, because it was a sacred language, that it was more meaningful than just telling stories, and so it was used for boundary markers, for tomb markers.
There are. This is a site, and
yeah.
this is where this event's happened.
But of course, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. A lot of this stuff probably was written on materials that did not last.
Well, and sort of to add to that, first, I want to state that when we say runes, we're talking about younger Futhark. The actual runes that you tend to see that are called Elder Futhark were out of use by the point of the Viking Age.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
as for their use, they do sometimes record some stories and whatnot, or they'll make vague references to
I know that there
various
are
myths.
references to stories that seem to confirm stuff that's in these other works.
Right.
But the
mostly they
telling
were
of the
used
stories.
to mark momentous occasions, or hey, I'm a king, I rule this land, etc.
And by the
Well,
blessings of Thor and his father Odin and so on.
Yeah,
But
and Josh and Dr. Josh can tell you about, cuneiform tablets and how excited everyone was when we finally got to read them. And then what did we find on those tablets, Dr. Josh?
Oh, well,
Cooking ingredients. No.
everything.
Among other things, yes.
So could I interject for just a second?
Sure.
Again,
please.
We're coming from this or at this from a very uninformed position. So I'm trying to gauge the audience based on how I'm feeling, what I'm understanding, and thus far it's not much. So Jerry, Misha, could you guys maybe start and kind of follow through with like what are the sources that we have? Because you've started to talk about it, and then it's kind of gone off into words that I don't understand. And
Okay.
Well, and where we got off the rails is they did tell Calon interject when there's something to correct, but maybe you should just let them say a few things that maybe you're wrong
Well, as I say, we're not experts. I think Calon is
Yeah.
certainly compared to us. But so anyway, the point that the first point is that most of the stories that have reached us, and Calon can find plenty of exceptions, have come through Christian authors. And there are stories in the Prose Edda which are recited. If you go to look up Uncle Bob's Book of Norse Mythology, they're based on Snorri Sturluson. Love that name. And they have a Christian influence. Some of the things are the description of the corrupting power of gold, I strongly suspect, came from the Christian influence. The portrayal of Loki is closer to Satan than I think he might have been in some of the stories. Where was I going? There's another one which is
Well, that's if Loki was worshipped at all.
And I've not seen that it was worshipped, but these tales were, some of the Norse myths sound like great fireside stories. Like, hey, let's sit around. Let me tell you about the time that
Well, yeah, and that's because
Loki
they were written by
conspired.
skulls.
Yeah. And I mean,
um,
it's a lot more fun than sitting in church and listening to somebody. One Ahab begat Rahab.
Exactly. And also,
But,
the Norse actually have a sense of humor in their tales too.
Yes, and that's actually something I hope that we can get to. I mean, and I'm hoping, Calon, tonight to share a couple of stories. The death of Baldur and Thor's wedding.
Like from the Gesta Danorum or the Eddas.
You're way beyond me, okay? But I'm talking about, according to the story, Baldur was the favorite son of Odin and Frigg, and Frigg had a dream that said that he would be killed, and so she went around and made a pact with everything on the earth that nothing could harm them. But according to one version of the story, and I know there's many, she forgot mistletoe because it was just this weed.
She didn't actually forget it. It was too young to swear an oath.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
That's a better version of the story.
That's a good
But,
version.
okay, so this story goes on that the gods used to, since Baldur was invincible, they would play games. They would throw knives at him. Hey, watch this. Hey, Baldur. Nothing could harm him. But Loki found mistletoe was, hey, there's an exemption here. Ooh, paragraph C, carved a spear out of mistletoe. I don't know how you do that. I mean, it's good.
That's a good point. And that's why one of the hypotheses that I've heard is that there's a missing myth in which mistletoe ends up getting punished.
Okay. Interesting. But who was it that picked up? I have it here. Pig grabbed the staff, and Loki says, "Hey, try this staff." And he throws it, and Baldur gets killed. And it's a funny story, even though it's dark. But it's funny just because of these silly guys overlooking something and throwing knives at your brother. Just
It's a very bizarre image.
But I can hear that. I read that story and I just pictured people at a fireside camp, let me tell you about what happened to Balder.
Yeah, Balder dear.
Yes.
So let me ask her. So are we into the outline yet, or because I've kind of lost my place here?
We have a little bit. My main point that I was mentioning was because many of these stories come from the Norse, from these Christian traditions. They are heavily Christian influenced. One of the first sources that we have, the earliest sources we have of Norse mythology, and this is a fascinating one, is a gentleman named Tacitus. Who was Tacitus? Your turn.
Okay. Tacitus was a 1st century CE, I believe, Roman author who wrote a book called Germania.
Germania.
And he talks about the German people. He never visited. I don't know if he knew any German people, and there have been historians who kind of look at his work and say, we think that he's more making fun of Romans than he is talking about the Germans. So perhaps he's not the best anthropological source for finding out about the Germanic people.
But that's for Europe.
Yeah, but they're I mean, admittedly, also in a little bit of defense of him, there have been some things that have been traced via Proto-Germanic linguistics that may indicate some sort of truth value there.
And I didn't quite hear. What was that you had said, Megan?
He's like Herodotus, but for Europe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. I like that.
And also, I wanted to ask Josh: does Tacitus, play a big part in the studies? Is that something you study, the works of Tacitus?
No.
So I looked at Tacitus as an undergraduate. I did a lot of classics. But no, our postdoctoral, our doctoral program doesn't go as far as the 1st century CE.
Oh, okay. And I wanted to ask you and Jerry something real quick, kind of apropos of nothing. I wanted to make sure it was, because I'm always referring to Misha as Dr. Misha and to Josh as Dr. Josh. Am I missing a salutation on the front of your two names? Or I don't.
Grand High Potentate is good. I like that.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say the Right Reverend, if possible.
the right Reverend
honorable
Megan Lewis.
Just Megan is fine.
And just Josh is fine.
Okay. So go ahead, Jerry.
You can also call me the guy who helped put his wife through college. Financial support of Dr.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So, but Tacitus does just go into some details on the religion. He apparently, and Calon, let me finish, you jump in because I think you're going to correct me on some things. But he specifically refers to Odin as Mercury, and he says these people worship Mercury more than anybody else. He refers to Thor as Hercules, and he writes down stories about their relationship with Hercules and stories about this. And he in his book, he basically says Hercules, and people have gone through and said, we think he's talking about Thor because of various aspects of the attributes and so on. But Tacitus's work goes into a lot of details about Norman culture, which is that wasn't Norman then, it was just Norse. Germanic culture, which is just like look at these funny people.
Yes.
They will work hard at first and then they get lazy. I mean, full of stereotypes.
They can't stand the heat.
But they're good at cold, and they're women. They let the women follow the men into battle and basically stand next to him and say, "Are you going to let him do that? Are you going to?" So that's part of Tacitus's story. Calon, go ahead, correct me.
I mean, there's not really that much to correct. The Romans did have a bit of a nasty tendency to equate their gods with those of other people.
I'm not sure that's necessarily nasty. I think that's trying to make sense of a culture that's entirely alien to yourself.
Well, when I say nasty, I mean nasty in the sense that it later plays into confusion mythologically.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, but here would be.
But the interesting thing is that he mentions like Odin at all, because from at least from what toponyms have suggested, Odin as a god is somewhat of a later as a chief god is somewhat of a later development. In fact, there are a lot of pagans and a lot of research that could indicate that actually Tyr was the original sky god.
I can see that because
but what I would question, what I would be interested about that is that the Romans, their attitude to religion was extraordinarily inclusive, as in, sure,
Yeah, the
we'll
Pater
worship
Romana.
anybody. We'll go ahead, let's build a temple. And one of the things that bothered the Romans was that the Germans supposedly worshipped out of doors.
Yes,
That-
and that is that is an aspect that has been researched, and basically the term for it is vey, or
Yeah.
vey.
Mhm.
They would worship in like these open sort of shires with maybe a piece of maybe a statue in the middle, and it would be enclosed by ropes called veybond.
Okay.
And this was sort of their way of making a temple, so
Yeah.
sacred groves and whatnot. Because you also get a lot of intermixture with the Germanic and then the Celtic traditions as well. So there are some similarities there.
So, Calon, what does Nothron mean? You've got that secondary name of Nothron. Does that have a meaning?
Nertus?
Oh, really?
Do you mean Nertus?
Okay. Is that what it says?
Is it Nerthus?
No. It's on your name. It says.
Oh,
N-A-O.
Nadra.
Okay.
That's a D.
That's a D with a. Sometimes that's pronounced
That's
as a
an A.
TH. But,
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. That means snake/viper in Old Norse.
Oh, okay.
All right. Charming.
I mean, that's
So
because I'm a snake.
okay.
Well, look,
Okay.
as a
Nadra.
a novice on all this again, and just for my sake, because I am such an idiot, I'd like to maybe get back to the outline that Jerry provided. Now we've covered Tacitus, we've covered Snorri Sturluson, which when I did a little bit of research which involved mostly watching Crash Course Norse Mythology,
Which is pretty good, by the way.
Which is not bad.
Yeah. And when they brought up that name Snorri Sturluson, I mean, I just couldn't believe
Stop
that.
laughing.
But according to the outline you provided, Jerry, then now who's Elder Edda and Dietmar of Berzeberg? Hey,
I'm gonna.
Calon,
Okay, the Eddas, EDDA, Elder Edda and Snorri Sturluson wrote the prose Edda. These Eddas are these long sagas, which are basically contain sort of the summary of much of the mythos as it has come to us. Adam of Bremen was a German historian. He was a bishop. It's weird. I'm getting some weird interference.
Yeah, hey, Calon, could you mute? We're getting a lot of background noise. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, so Adam of Bremen and Dietmar of Merisburg was
They were bishops.
They were both bishops, I believe, but he wrote about some of the horrible things going on and describing some of the sacrifices and stuff like this from a very Christian perspective.
And we're talking about what, 10th century CE?
Yeah.
9th, 10th century CE.
10th
So
and
this
11th,
is
actually.
much later. But it's interesting because these are Christian leaders who have many of these areas were Christianized in the 900s.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are, interestingly enough, kind of digging up these stories. That's Snorri was a monk, and
No,
Yeah.
he was a legislator. His
Really?
wife dumped him for having too many
he
affairs.
was a law singer. Okay, all right.
Sturluson was a
Yeah.
he was, I think he was basically he was a law speaker. That's a
Law
little
speaker,
bit different
Okay,
than a priest. He basically had to memorize a bunch of laws.
right. And recite them, or at least a third of them, once a year at the All Thingy.
What do you call that thing where they all get together?
The All Thingy.
The Althing.
The all
All
thing.
thing.
This thing.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I love some of this.
Like a thing is a meeting place.
Yes.
Yes, but
And
that's the
they're-
word. Thing.
Yes. and they still have them in England. The Isle of Manx has an all thing, and the Queen sometimes goes or sometimes sends a representative to watch the proceedings.
Iceland still calls us Parliament.
Iceland still calls its parliament the
You
Althing.
guys are saying all thing,
Yes.
THING.
All
That's
means inclusive or old.
Yeah.
Thing, THING, means the meeting place. Thing.
Yeah, I mean,
All-
okay. So the thing is a different meaning in the English
think
definition. Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's just a meeting play. It's just a meeting. All also has this sort of intensifying effect as well. So instead of just having a local thing where you have a bunch of locals meet up, you have the all thing, which is the highest thing, if that makes sense.
Sorry, Jerry, can I interject briefly?
By all means.
We've been going a while, and I'm a little worried because we're academics and specialists of getting a little bit mired down in some of the details, because I have that problem all the time.
I don't.
No, you're very concise. Could we maybe move on to like a basic overview of Norse mythology, because I think that might help
I think so.
non-specialists like myself.
Let me say
get
one
a handle.
sentence about the Good Saga.
Yes, please.
Which is just that it is an unusual saga in that it is Swedish instead of Icelandic, but it's another source. That was just a list. But I would like to, and Calon, I'd really appreciate your help here if we can try to summarize some of the basics of Norse mythology, going all the way back to, you called him Umir instead of Ymir, but the first god who theoretically gave birth to Odin under one story out of his armpit. And then he collapsed into his body. The body became the world, and Midgard, where we live, came out of his eyebrows, and it's good stuff. But and then we've got the different types of gods and so on.
No, that's not actually how it works.
Okay, go for it.
Umir's body actually becomes Midgard, the whole body. His eyebrows become the enclosure. His brain matter becomes the clouds, and to see his blood.
Okay.
Wow.
And
so going off the outline here, number 3, where it's just the basics.
John, I was just about to sum up some of the sources.
Sure.
So basically, the reason why Snorri Sturluson wrote the Prose Edda to begin with was as a guide to teach young Icelanders how to write.
Oh, because they already knew the tales.
Right. Well, some of the tales were known, other tales were being forgotten, but whether or not he actually wrote it to preserve the tales and preserve the traditions is a little bit of a subject of debate. But basically, that's why when you go in there, you'll find a list of kennings and how to write in Ljósa, I think, the other, basically a particular kind of Norse meter. And various other details in addition to that. Basically to keep somewhat of the tradition of the skalds alive.
So, can we discuss the cosmology of these?
And Aesir versus Vanir, which honestly is something I don't entirely understand, but they're the different types of gods.
The Aesir versus Vanir, basically the way you can view them is as kind of a little bit like in other European traditions where they're not separate. They're not like different classes of deity. They're all deity. They're all gods. But they're simply different tribes. Because you have to remember, Norse society was very tribally driven. Your clan was an important part of your life.
Okay.
Along with the Jotnar, who are the traditionally translated as giants.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the giants are a separate, fascinating subtext. But one of the things that's interesting about the gods is how different they are from certainly our Judeo-Christian concept. And I assume, Josh, I really want to ask you about this, the Babylon, because of course the gods can die. Odin doesn't know everything. He gives his eye in exchange for wisdom, and he sits on a throne where he can watch what's going on. There's not this kind of omniscience that we see in Judeo-Christian tradition.
That's very common in the whole of the ancient Near East. Yahweh is and honestly, he's an anomaly, having this all-knowing, all-present deity.
But he doesn't.
Well, no, that's true. He doesn't know everything. That's a bit
most of that stuff tends to be unique to Christianity and Islam and various other traditions.
Well, even Greek gods, they could die, but they didn't stay dead.
Well, neither do the Norse gods. Baldur doesn't stay dead. He comes back after Ragnarok.
What about Odin? Well, there's the second birth after Ragnarok, and Odin gets eaten by Fenrir.
Yes. And only 3 of his children survive Ragnarok.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know I'm interrupting, but so Jerry, you've kind of put this outline together, and I keep looking at it and going, "Oh, this would be great if we could just go through it one time."
Okay, let's try to stay closer to the outline.
Yeah, but I mean, could we just like we can talk about the details of it later, and we can debate about it and all that stuff. But I'm saying this specifically from a person that doesn't have this background. I feel like we're getting close to actually going through some type of an introduction here. Jerry, could you guys just walk us through this, at least this section?
Okay,
yeah, and hold on one second. I just want to say, and then what we can do is like let's go through section 3 now and go through those bullet points that you listed, Jerry. And then if there's anything that's inaccurate or not fleshed out quite a bit, then Calon, interject. But
Calon, take notes. And let's get through it. Is what I'm saying.
Still have to eat dinner. Okay,
All right.
Basics, we have two types of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir. They have different attributes. They behave differently. They interact sometimes. Norse mythology has, and again, I'm really summarizing and I'm going to be wrong, there are 12 main gods. There are lots of other gods. There are 12 main gods. Odin, Ymir or Ymir, Frigg, who was Odin's wife. She was the goddess of foresight. She can see the future, but she doesn't tell, which is kind of like, what's the point? You've got, of course, Thor. Thor was one of the most popular gods. He's the god. The name comes from thunder, and controlling the weather was seen as a huge part of his attributes, as well as war. And of course, there's a whole story about how he got Mjolnir, his hammer.
Yeah.
And it's a fun story that we would, if we go into it, we will never get through this, but it's a great story. Loki tricked some people. It's fun. Balder is another son who was the favorite of the gods, considered the best looking. Tyr, Tyr, was kind of the god of war, although there's overlapping responsibilities, which is curiously. Odin had some responsibility for death and wisdom and war occasionally, but Tyr seems to have been one of the main war gods, but it appears that when people were going to battle, they would often call on Thor. No, of course, the weather was big in those days too. Okay. Bragi was the god of music and poetry. Loki in the Marvel universe is this evil, conniving guy. He has different aspects that I have seen in Norse mythos. Sometimes he's just this prankster who occasionally kills people. But it's kind of, I think he might represent the capricious nature and the silly ways that fate seems to be tricking you. You've got Hel, from which we get the word hell. Mm-hmm. Hell is a person and hell is a place. Her dwelling is called the halls of hell. She is kind of the ruler of the afterlife. Stories of an afterlife are confusing, and I'm hoping Calon can summarize this real briefly. The stories of the afterlife, half the people killed in battle go to Valhalla under some stories, and other stories, some of the people don't. Some of the people go to hell. She's a person. Then there's Helmdall. Helmdall is the god of white people.
Heimdallr.
Thank you.
Okay.
Again, we had a comment in the live chat saying these Americans are slaughtering these names. Okay.
Yeah, there's also quite a bit of mythos also that I think needs to be corrected. Ymir is not one of the main gods, but I'll let you continue.
Okay, we'll keep going. I had found that he was on a list of the top 12, but we can get there. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other lesser people who comes up. I think Ymir, because he dies early, is probably what you're going to say. But Helmdall is, again, he's the guy with the shining god.
Ymir is also not a god.
This guy is so white, he has a Starbucks inside his palace. His palace is located at the base of the Rainbow Bridge, has 9 mothers, don't ask. In Ragnarok, according to one story, he and Loki battle each other to the death and both die. There's Freyr, who's the goddess of prosperity and virility. Freyr. Okay. This is where we get into the fun stuff. Freyr has a magic sword that can fight by itself. Just, hey, go fight. This is stuff straight out of D&D games.
Regular.
He has a folding sailing ship, which is only mentioned once, but he has a sailing ship that he can fold up and carry with him. And he has a glow-in-the-dark pig.
Very, very
glow-in-the-dark pig. Well, yeah. Don't you have a glow-in-the-dark pig? I didn't mention.
Hey, real quick, Jerry, you mentioned that someone that had 9 mothers. Does that have anything to do with
Frigg and Heimdallr?
does that have anything to do with item C in the third section where it says something about the 9 realms? Are those tied together?
Nine is the word. This is what Calon was saying. 9 is a number that comes up a lot. Yggdrasil is the world tree. And
No.
all of the realms are like off branches on the basis of Yggdrasil. And there's 9 is there, but 9 mothers is apparently, and I'm going to let Calon jump in a second because I know I'm wrong, but the 9 mothers is apparently just, they love the number 9. Finally, I was going to mention, I didn't mention that Thor travels, I love this story, on a chariot pulled by...
Is it rabbits?
No, goats.
Goats, that's right.
You have the story of Ruxva and the other slave boy.
And then there's Freya, the goddess of war and beauty. In some stories, she was in charge of the Valkyrie. She is the one that one of the giants falls in love with her, wants to marry her.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta get this story in. It's just too good. He wants to marry her, so he steals Thor's hammer. Thor says, "You can't do that," and he dresses up as Freya and goes to the wedding. I'm sorry. I can't imagine a woman that's beautiful and Thor being able to pass, but don't go there. Okay. Anyway, and he ends up killing everybody, and they all have a good time afterwards. So those are the basics of the 12 gods. There are the 9 realms of different Earths, of the world. There's Asgard, which is like the spiritual realm.
Okay.
Midgard, which is where we live. According to what I read, not all of them are named in any sources people have been able to find. Calon, is that correct? I could not find lists of all the names.
Yeah, like there's some questions on Svartalfheimr and Alfheimr, whether there's a difference between dark and light elves. Which also, by the way, when the Norse say white, they don't literally mean white. It's another term they use for beautiful.
This I did not know. That's interesting because I was going to mention real briefly that in the Norse mythos, you've got the gods, you've got a whole bunch of them. You've got 12 principal ones. I think Calon may say different.
No, Umir is not a god. He is a Jotnar. He is the first Jotnar.
All right. But then you've got this whole range of other creatures, which are, how do you say it? Jotnar? Jotnar? Yes.
Jotnar.
Giants, dwarves, elves, Valkyrie, Dis, which are spirits, and
so
of course,
Freya is actually called Vana Dis. Dis of the Vana. Dis is the singular for Disir.
Yeah, okay.
It's just a general term to refer to female spirits.
Okay. So, but as I've said, the gods could still die, which was kind of a curious thing. But I wanted to just run through this real basically and invite Josh and Megan to tell me a little bit about how this differs. And I was surprised to hear that, Megan, you were saying that weaker gods who can die, are common in other mythos.
I mean, they, similarly to what Calon was saying, they don't necessarily stay dead, but they do die. It's a very real danger, a very real possibility. They have fights, they beat each other up, they get defeated, and they throw temper tantrums, and they're remarkably human. They're just humans on a bigger, more powerful scale.
Odd, huh?
Well, what about all these different types of creatures? I mean, giants and dwarves and elves.
So giants aren't a creature. Giants is a horrible translation for Jotnar.
Okay.
The actual word Jotnar is more closer. It comes from the Proto-Germanic etunas, which basically means a devourer.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
The Jotnar are more chaotic beings than they are little giants. Even though they may be described as being gigantic, that's just part of also being in a category which you could call a god, even though by tradition they are separate from the Asir. Sorry, messed up the plural there. From the Asir.
But I was also curious that the duties of the gods don't seem as clearly defined as I thought they would.
Saying god of doesn't really make sense in Norse mythology. It's
That's
more
kind of
god associated.
Okay.
So Odin is associated with wisdom. He is not. the god, strictly speaking. He's not strictly speaking the god of wisdom. He's associated with wisdom and various other things. He's also a god of death,
Okay.
as
So
well as a god of the berserker.
with or Megan and Josh, how does that compare with other religions as far as they're associated, but they're not necessarily the sole source? I always thought Aphrodite was the god of beauty and wisdom, and that's just what it is. But is it work that way?
Yeah. It depends. We have a similar problem in talking about Mesopotamian religion in that spans like 4,000 years and a huge geographical region. So you get lots of what may be termed minor deities who have the same areas of expertise, maybe, who are then at a later point amalgamated into one individual divine figure. So then you get a somewhat odd collection of attributes given to one deity, because originally they were 5 different deities who just had enough similarities that they could be comfortably combined together to the one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's entirely fair.
I think Inanna is just the goddess who decides to go ahead and wreck everyone else's roles.
So I know in Mesopotamia, each city-state had its own patron god, and that was very true with the Greeks and the Romans. Did these gods function as a regional sort of protection?
Yes. So you get in the early dynastic period, quite very early on in Mesopotamian history, you get something called the Stele of the Vultures, which is a massive stone obelisk with both an inscription and a carved relief. And that's joined by various other royal inscriptions that detail a conflict between 2 cities, Lagash and Umma, which had different patron deities. And the stele actually shows this human conflict being acted out by the patron gods of those cities. And the victory of Lagash over Umma is portrayed as Ningirsu, the god of Lagash, overcoming Shara, the patron god of Umma. So you definitely do see that very regional identity. And that also kind of feeds into the synchronization that I was talking about earlier. You have lots of different pantheons for each regional location. So then as history progresses, as power becomes centralized, as empires are formed, these like mini pantheons, they all have some of the same gods and goddesses. So as time goes on, these pantheons are kind of collapsed into 1 or 2 like overriding official religions. We don't really know if these official religions are the religions of the people or if it's just the ruling classes. But what you do see is like the Ishtar of like Uruk and the Ishtar of Sippar get combined into the same figure, and it doesn't seem terribly troubling to anyone in this period that those 2 goddesses had different parents. So you get Ishtar in some texts being described as the daughter of An, Ishtar in other texts being described as the daughter of Sin. It doesn't seem to give anyone much trouble, but it can be quite confusing from a scholarly perspective.
Sumerians and consistency don't go together.
So, Calon, I'd like to know.
Hey, and real quick though, Misha, before you go on,
Sure.
I wanted to say something about this a while back, but I figured if Calon wasn't going to correct you, I think she's just too easygoing and nice.
Or there's too many mistakes to keep
no, because we're some of us are mispronouncing Calon's name. It's Calon.
Calon.
Calon. Okay.
It's
Calon.
All right.
it's
I've
a
mispronounced
Welsh name.
everything else. So
Yeah, but no, I just wanted to, and like I said,
of course.
she has not corrected anybody up to this point, but I just wanted to do it for her. She was just, too easygoing, and I wouldn't want you to call me Joan. So
I appreciate the correction and sorry that we've been getting.
No problem.
But anyway, go on, Misha.
Sure. So my question to Calon is, would the Norse gods have been part of the political structure as they were in the rest of antiquity?
So
because I know in Roman and Greece culture and Egyptian culture, religion and politics were all mixed up.
So the answer to that is, in a way, yes. We do have this association between like Odin and nobles, for example, and then Thor being, and this goes back to the to the myth of Heimdallr and the giving birth and the birth of the free classes, the slaves, the freemen, and the kings.
Okay.
So like Thor was more of the is more for the common man, for example.
Oh, okay.
And Odin what tended to prefer the elites, like literally pretty much the elites everywhere, the elite soldiers and the heads of government. Now, granted, being Odin's favorite is not a good thing, as we see from Eric Bloodaxe, who
Being
ends up getting
Yahweh's
beaten
favorite
to
was
death.
always a good thing either.
But so yeah, there does seem to be this connection with various classes and whatnot. Although, like I said, this is mainly speaking to evidence that has been gathered from West Norse resources. For East Norse, there could be some there could be some differences.
Hey, real quick, Tomas in the chat, please do me a favor and get rid of Matt Powell. Just do it now, okay? If he's disrespecting a raging atheist, boot him. Please boot him right now. If Knock wants to bring him back in, he can unhide him later. But get rid of Matt Powell, please. I'm not logged in on my mod account, so I can't do it. So please.
All right.
Go ahead,
What
folks.
was the floor? Vengeance was important in these cultures, which actually I wanted to touch real briefly on this, Calon, because this is a fascinating thing to me. And again, I don't know how this compares with other religions. There are these characters, I guess this exists in Christianity as well, who are heroes, who are mortals, but so many of the sagas are about these amazing supernatural journeys. Like, of course, I'm going to call him Siegfried. I know that's not right, but I read this stuff in German. Yeah, Sigrid. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Sigrid and
Sigrid, yes.
These stories,
Dragon Slayer.
The Dragon Slayer.
From the Volsung saga.
Yeah, which is a great story. I'm going to mention just in passing.
Great. It's also great for giving people culture shock when it comes to the Viking Age.
How so?
How so?
I'm sorry.
Because of the many brutal acts that are committed in it. Like, you have Sinfjotli. Like, for example, in order to become a great warrior, well, how do you become a great warrior? Well, you go out and rob people.
Well, it's the truth.
And
but the Vikings were not always the most violent people around.
No. The whole time.
But the Vikings will eventually
that's complicated.
start colonizing. They're going to start trading. They're going to do all of these different things historically that they're going to get blamed for some really.
Well, yes, that's because our history was written by the English and the French.
Yeah.
So here's where I kind of like to draw a little bit of a distinction between the Vikingar and the Norse people. The Norse were farmers, yes. But you also had people who would go Viking, which is to basically say they went raiding. They were pirates.
Okay.
Basically.
You also had traders who were economic.
Well, yeah, they would trade the stolen loot.
Well.
Hey, did we ever get through that section and talk about all those other different beings?
The Jotnar.
We covered it briefly.
The giants, the dwarves, the elves, and all that.
Yeah, the Landvættar are actually among the more interesting because they're still actually you'll still get Icelanders who will make offerings to them.
So just help me. Help.
Calon, which ones did they make offerings to?
The Landvættar.
Well, just help me in my immersion in my idiocy here. Whereabouts are we on the outline right now?
We are basically wrapping up on number 4, contrasting with other religions and mythologies, and we're about to launch into Norse mythology since then and how it's influenced our
Okay.
lives. I'm
Because
going to,
I lost my place, and I do apologize for that. So thank you so much for.
I did want to mention that you can find these the prose Edda, the verse Edda, or the elder Edda online. You go in and type it. They're available free for download in translations, which are of varying qualities. I would recommend anybody who's interested do this because some of them are a really fun read. I was going to read a section during the show, but one, we're hurting for time, and two, my pronunciations are so bad that I think we'd be in trouble.
And it's painful.
But there are some great stories, and it's really, if you want to spend a month with some of these sagas, it's actually, I had been under the impression that
You
they
could
were
spend
dense.
years.
Yeah, but I was under the impression they were dense and incomprehensible. But at least in the translations I've seen, they're really quite fun.
The thing with the Norse is that they were always kind of, in a way, very pragmatic.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to ask. So, in that vein, if there's a since you've been studying this recently, Jerry, is there a good book that you would say is just a good, solid, scholarly but down to earth, user friendly, palatable introduction to Norse mythology?
I'm right now. I'm working on John Lindau's Norse Mythology: A Guide to the Gods, Heroes, Rituals, and Beliefs. But this is kind of an encyclopedic piece. It's an interesting take, and he does a really nice job of opening this all up, and then it's a nice glossary of all of this. But it's not a nice, pleasant read through.
Is there an extensive bibliography? Is there an extensive bibliography in there as well?
Also the problem is with scholarship and finding resources is that a lot of this stuff is not published in English. It tends to be in like Norwegian and Danish.
There's enough for at least for a layperson like me. For Calon,
in fact, I think the best text to use is if you want to look at an overall sort of like literature summary, is Myths and Religion of the North. I can't remember the author at the moment, but that is one which basically takes a lot of the Icelandic sources and whatnot and sort of does an overall literature review of what we know.
And sometimes, sometime after this post as a video, could you put a comment in the comment section, Calon, and link to that?
Sure.
It's
a really hard book to find.
Yeah, Josh, to answer your question, this has a 20-page chapter on just sources.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So picking up that book, Misha, would lead you to many other things that you could read about it then, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
but the poetry is so beautiful.
It is, but it's not in our conventional sense. It's like very unusual. Oh, there's another source that I do like, even though I haven't gotten into it, which is there is a rewriting of two of the poems from the Elder Edda that was written in 1935 by an Oxford professor.
Yep. One of those weird Oxford professors.
His name was John Tolkien.
Tolkien.
It was published in 2012, but it's called, and I don't have it in front, The Legend of
Sigmund and
Grendel, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is available now, and I haven't been able to read it, but I've been trying to get my hands on it. It is apparently, he tries to capture the rhythm of the Norse, of Icelandic, and put it into English. And apparently it was something that he wrote as a young man and sort of set aside and forgot about. And Christopher Tolkien found it after years.
Yeah.
And it was first published in 2012. Sigurd and Gudrun. Thank you to Christopher Hansen for the correction there.
Thank you.
Yes. Have you read it? So by the way,
Sigurd, the Dragon Slayer. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Sigurd, I keep thinking of, actually, I wanted to talk about that. If we can move on to a little bit about how we got our modern conceptions of Norse mythos and the way it's been used. And part of this comes out of the 19th century, and there was the industrialization and everything, the smokestacks, the industry, and the birth of the Romantic. And there was a reinterest in old things, old religions, old tales.
Yeah, it was tied both with the Romantic era and with the rise of nationalism. And Johannes Herder, who was a German historian and philosopher around the end of the 18th century, came up with this idea about every single group has its own culture with a K, and this is going. Yes, and it's going to lead into our ideas of nationalism, and all of a sudden it's going to start this kind of a craze of people digging back in their own past and trying to find all of their own pasts again, and basically saying, hey, our stories are as good to tell as everybody else's.
And
basically romanticism on drugs.
yes, and the Germans got into this, and the Germans kind of claimed the whole Norse mythos. But I did want to mention, since we covered them in passing, Tolkien, brilliant writer, brilliant storyteller. Lord of the Rings is a great read, but don't think much of it is original, because so much of this stuff is straight out of the Eddas and other tales. The corrupting of one ring is central to one of the poems in the Elder Edda.
That's because Tolkien was an expert in many of these old languages. So he was a linguist by training. And so he was able to dig into these, into the writings better than most other people of the time could have.
Mm-hmm. Probably a mixture of the Eddas and the Kalevala.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So let's talk for a second about Wagner. This
that
is
anti-Semite.
He had other problems too, but Wagner was part of a whole movement of trying to create this pan-German nationalism, and one of his sponsors was King Ludwig II of Bavaria, and they started creating, well, obviously Wagner's operas, which retell the Ring cycle, which is the tale of the Nibelungs created ring. It's of gold. It's corrupting. It's powerful. People kill each other to get their hands on it. Anyway, but it had this very strong German nationalist tendency. And you notice the picture in the lower right there. That is from one of the original productions. And it is believed by some to be one of the first common instances of the horned helmet.
The ahistorical horned helmets.
The almost entirely, somebody once found a single tapestry that has somebody that looks like they got horns on their helmets, but certainly the way we interpret them are pretty darn ahistorical and just something that we repeat. But so these costumes caught on, the whole mythos, so that we created this, anyway, this very romantic version of these tales. And, well, it's kind of how we think of some of this stuff today. Oh, these are the Norns from, I believe these are from a Wagnerian opera. They were yes, the Norns are very similar, and help me on this, please, Calon. Calon?
Calon.
They are like the Fates of Greek mythology, I believe. They sort of spin out.
There's a ton of them, and they're also, everyone is subject to them. They determine what's referred to as the order.
But I did want to mention,
heathenry.
Back on the subject of Wagner, and Wagner, of course, you've got Siegfried, Sigurd, the ring, it corrupts. One of the guys, in order to do it, gets a magic helmet. He turns into a dragon. He's a central character. And I have a person here who wanted to comment on this. With me is, this is Fafnir. Fafnir. I see. And you're a regular feature in Wagnerian operas. Okay, but you're an important part of the story. Right, you are a dwarf, he wants the gold, you take a magic helmet, you become a dragon, you kill people, Siegfried fights you. What's wrong with that? Okay, yes, I know you're not really a dragon, you're really a dinosaur. I know not all lizards are the same, not all reptiles are the same, we shouldn't lump them together. But let me ask you, what do you want from Wagner? You want to be the tenor?
But you're a dragon.
It's a pretty decent tenor.
There's my magic sword when I need it.
Oh, I knew Rex was going to make an appearance. I was hoping anyway.
I
Yeah.
hope. I'm very glad.
I wasn't sure how they were going to work it into this topic, but they did a lovely job of it.
You always should get suspicious of Jerry and Misha when they show you several pictures in a row, and Misha is mysteriously quiet.
Covering for the costume change.
You're on to us.
And just for anybody that's listening in the background, we're not bored with what Jerry and Misha are saying. I think that one of us is maybe outside and there's a cricket in the background. That's not some kind of meme that's being played, but to go back to where we were, you left off on Wagner, and you something I'm interested in is bullet point F in section 5, and you alluded to it a few moments ago. And in your note here, you say, yes, we have to talk about Nazis if we're going to talk about Norse mythology. What does that mean?
I mean, I can speak more. I can speak what basically esoteric Nazism was derived off of this weird mystical interpretation that we refer to in modern day heathenry as folkism. The idea that somehow your Germanic blood gives you special permission to deal with these gods.
A lot of this grows out of, believe it or not, a English writer by the name of Herbert Spencer Chamberlain. Herbert Stewart Chamberlain, thank you, who wrote a multi-volume history of the Aryan people, where he tries to take Germanic culture and take it back to the very early Persian dynasties, and he tries to say that there was this group of Indo-Europeans who inhabited these areas, but they were this very unusual race. And Chamberlain does this tries to create this idea that, well, yes, you had all these different races of men, and mixing some of them together was okay. It made one of them better, and mixing others of them was really, really bad, and made mongrel. And it's a really offensive thing to try to read and try to get slogging through. But he insists that Jesus was an Aryan.
Of course he was.
He was born in Jerusalem, or I'm sorry, born in Nazareth. And he goes through and recreates history from this attitude of the Aryans were the best and the greatest race.
But the Nazis did
mainly because, and I can speak a little bit to this, the evidence, but basically in the way that Aryan race was set up in India, where you had the Aryans, which Aryan means noble.
Right.
And you had the Aryans come in and they subdue the local population and they lord basically over the local population. This kind of governmental model is what the Nazis were trying to aim for with their Gawa system.
Yeah.
They did also adopt Nazi symbols.
Yes.
They had the SS emblem was based on an interpretation of lightning bolts from Thor's hammer.
And the dark sun.
The dark suns. The swastika.
The SS symbols were actually runes.
Okay.
They were the that's why we, when working with runes, you tend to use a different than the lightning bolt one. The particular rune is Ziegel, is what it's called in German.
Which doesn't hold water with me, that the swastika was used as an emblem for Mjolnir at times, Mjolnir being Thor's hammer. I don't quite buy it because, of course, the Romans and the Indians used swastikas.
Yeah.
But certainly this allegation has been made. The Project Valkyrie, there's a whole range of symbols that were in there because of this pan-German nationalism, and this is our German heritage. And it's great to celebrate your heritage, but it's not great to use it to oppress other people.
Yeah, that was
pretty basic, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a difference between understanding your past and looking at it as this is very interesting and this justifies me lording over you or oppressing you, and that is where the Nazis went.
But there is a group today who are really scary to me. These are called Soldiers of Odin. This is a white supremacist organization. Was founded in 2015 in Finland, but they're all over. You'll notice this guy has an American flag. They use the ahistorical horned helmet, but they tend to put the country's flag underneath it. So here is a Canadian group. This is in Montreal. They are basically trying to racial purity and so on. And, yes, the Vikings were kind of white, but as I say, you can celebrate your history without having to be an asshole.
And would you say that group is maybe
John.
they're guilty of maybe some cultural or religious appropriation?
Yeah, John, can I say something?
Yeah, sure. As soon as I get done saying what I'm saying, not a problem.
Well, no, I was trying to basically state that it's ahistorical to view the Vikings in any sort of like white supremacist sort of thing because they were traitors.
Mm-hmm.
And they dealt with people from the Greeks who are technically non-white to Arabs. In fact, one of the sources we have for Reconstruction is an Arab who wrote about what he saw and witnessed when he witnessed a Viking funeral.
And that's what I was alluding to. This group, you said they call themselves the Soldiers of Odin. Is that what it was?
Yeah, yes. That's one of the. That's one of the.
That's why I say it sounds like it's some cultural or religious appropriation on their part. And as Calon just said, to put those ideologies on the Vikings is incorrect.
And it's important to understand. As Calon was saying, the Vikings reached out to all sorts of people. There was a sword sheath that was in a Russian museum that was part of the Rus people had this elegant sword sheath, and they thought it had these abstract designs embroidered onto this sword sheath, and someone very recently looked at it and said, that's not abstract, that's Arabic. that this interplay of cultures was extraordinarily important. So using the Vikings as a way to separate yourself from the world is absolutely antithetical to who the Vikings were.
We do tend to think of history as being siloed. Yeah. And we were doing other stuff and finding out how much trade the Romans had with the Chinese.
Right.
They did. Really? So yeah. They may not have gone there, but they had connections and so on. And so the Norse, yes, some of them came from very far north. And what Calon was saying is when they held up the one god as being terribly white, that could have just meant very pretty because it was a similar word. Right. But, yes, they went all over. They weren't in isolation as we think they were. And, just the number of areas that were occupied by these forces. What did you do to us, John?
Calon must have had a connectivity issue. I got to bring her back.
We got her back.
There we go.
We got her back.
Oh, we've got her avatar. Her avatar's back. Yeah.
There we go.
I think. Oh, you must have went mobile for a little bit, didn't you? That's what. And now you're back at the computer. Is that what happened there?
More like got interrupted by some Wi-Fi, I think. I'm actually, I've been on mobile this whole time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, what in the note here on the outline it says Odin's warriors versus the soldiers of Odin.
That's actually a mistake. Honestly, Odin's Warriors is a motorcycle gang in Australia, and I had run across their name by accident. They are just a motorcycle gang. They are not the white supremacists. Soldiers of Odin are white supremacists, and they're really awful. But motorcycle gang, not a problem.
And yeah, she must be having some Wi-Fi. Oh, there she is again. So one thing I definitely want to get to here that we kind of jumped over in the outline is Norse mythology and the Marvel comic books. That's a note you have there in the final section that I'd like to hear you talk about that and how closely related to the actual Norse mythology that the Marvel comics are, if in
Calon?
fact they are.
Have you seen any of these movies?
I haven't, but I've heard general things. Like I know, for example, that that there's like this scene where Odin where Odin scolds Thor for starting a war on some planet, whereas if we're talking about the Odin from the mythos, that Odin would have said, "Good job,
Go guy!
great job there. Yeah, you did. Start a bigger war." Basically,
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously clean-cut American heroes that I believe they started in the very early '60s with Thor.
Right.
And Thor's hammer was called the Mountain Smasher. So apparently, that might be close. But I think beyond that, they're pretty much fantasy. And I'm not an expert on these films, but one of the things that fascinates me is the way, they're retelling the story again for their own purposes, just as Wagner did, just as the Nazis did. I'm not comparing Stanley to the Nazis, but I'm saying they're repurposing, and it's kind of part of what keeps some of these stories alive in a strange way, even if it is, and Calon may find that it's disrespectful to recreate the characters as 21st century sensitive, tolerant, peace-loving people.
I mean, like in terms of like respect, like you separate the societies out, and I'm fine with that. It's just kind of like grinds a little bit on the historical part. Like people picture like these Vikings as sometimes as this huge egalitarian utopia when they weren't.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I've been a little bit hesitant to bring up, since I know that you follow some of these religions in your personal life. Is like they could be pretty barbaric. They were
the thinnest skinned people you could ever meet. Like you call a Viking man a woman, you're going to get challenged to Holmgang.
Uh-oh.
What is that now?
Holmgang is a very traditional ritualistic way of dueling. Appears all the time in the sagas. And yeah. So it's always kind of funny because I'll see Focus pass around memes saying like, "Oh, your ancestors didn't care about words, so why should you?" When in reality, the Vikings were the thinnest skinned people probably almost on the planet. Like you go through and you look at the Norma book, which is the Icelandic book of laws, and you'll see various like very severe punishments for insults and whatnot, like some including like death. But yeah, no, thankfully in my own practice, basically I practice in a way that brings the traditions into the modern era and is based off of various practices of the ancient traditions, but I don't bring in all of them, like the idea of Drengur or of Ergi.
Which are?
A Drengur is probably the biggest compliment you could pay to a Viking man. It basically means like manly, the virtue of being a man, a very toxic masculinity kind of man. And Ergi is the opposite. It's being a woman. To call a Viking man that was considered to be among the greatest insults.
And yet the women were part of the society in some ways.
Yeah, women could actually be Drengur.
More so than they were in other parts of Europe at the time.
Yeah, no, women could be Drengur.
Really?
Apparently, yeah. Just kind of interesting. Yeah, there are other aspects. I think I can't remember the passage, but probably the best way to sort of explain, especially like some of the Viking mentalities, was in a sort of like a twist, we call people who are vicious and violent beasts. The Vikings took that and reversed it and say, we are the beast, and that's our prey over there.
So,
Is
so
a
the
wonderful
concept.
Sorry.
No, I just gonna. So, as far as in Viking culture, the concept of misogyny, they didn't have that.
That's a loaded statement.
Well, it depends on what you mean by misogyny. Did they recognize something that was like? Did they have a word for misogyny? I don't think so. No, they just
Women
saw
had more
what
rights, but they couldn't vote.
they couldn't vote at the all thing,
Right.
or at any. The difficulty when talking also about these cultures is that there tends to be a sort of a picture of a unified Scandinavia when that wasn't actually the case.
Very definitely. They weren't Rome.
It was
Not a single
bunch.
emperor.
Yeah, it was more like a bunch of homesteads that occasionally saw each other, fought with each other over very scarce resources.
Yeah, from what I understand, Iceland did not have a very unified government for a long time.
I don't recall
didn't-
they did either
Yeah,
until the Christians decided to start them in order to force conversion.
Yeah, and the King of Norway.
And of course, you got more kings in the Christian era.
Right.
But again, we're getting a little off topic, and it is getting late. So
Yeah.
I kind of like to start wrapping this up if you guys are game for that.
Yeah, just real quick before going down that pathway of wrapping things up. Josh and Megan, was there any questions that you haven't been able to get in and ask of Calon or Jerry or Misha?
No questions. An observation though. One of the things that I enjoy about the things like the Marvel movie remakes, and every time someone takes inspiration from ancient mythology, is that you get this wonderfully rich, complex tapestry of intertextuality where everything that has gone before it informs your understanding and enjoyment of the new creation that's been made. So even though the Marvel movies are almost nothing to do with the original folklore, it's fascinating to see how those ideas have been taken and kind of run with by modern creative thought.
I mean, to be fair, I mean they did, I think, keep Iron Man pretty close to
That's
the
true.
original.
Iron Man is basically historical fact.
Well, and and when it comes to the Marvel movies, just the way that one movie leads to the other, and the way they, intertwine all the stories and everything. I just whether it's true to historical context or not, I love the way they do that.
Very cleverly done.
Yes.
We've got several people in the comment thread that are saying they want to hear Calon's corrections of our.
Right. Yeah, we were going to get to that. I was just going to ask you and Misha if there was any points that you didn't get to that you'd like to wrap up on, and as a matter of fact, I was going to let Calon take 5 minutes or so at the end, or if to give any corrections, because there was people in the chat that were saying there were several points that Calon didn't get a chance to correct.
Okay.
But is there anything else?
I'm prepared, and I fully know that I am not the kind of expert that Calon is. So be ruthless. Go ahead.
So go ahead, Calon. Take a few minutes, and if there's anything you haven't been able to get in on as far as correcting what was said, I know Ashley brought a few things up that's about the mythos and the world tree. She said that maybe
Yggdrasil, yes. Which, by the way,
is ooh. I didn't know that. Okay, thank you.
As in the German Über.
Okay.
Yggdrasil. Yeah, which, by the way, for those who don't know, it does not mean world tree. It's traditionally fought as an ash tree, and was by the Norse too. But the actual name itself is a kinning, which is that is to say, it's a compound of uk, which is another name for Odin, and drasil, which means horse. The reason it's called this is because Odin hung himself from the world tree to get the runes. And a kinning for hanging is a horse, because it kind of, in a very dark, satirical way, it kind of looks like you're like a horse when you trace out a hanging body. So there's that. As for corrections, unfortunately, I didn't have a notepad with me.
Oh dear.
But
Everything you said was right, Jerry.
Well,
but
I mean,
I will say
go ahead.
that, for example, the points that do stick out, Umir is not. When we say God, usually when talking about Norse mythos, we tend to refer to like the Asir,
And the
which
Vineyard?
is the tribe of which is Odin, Freya, Frigg. Which, by the way, Freya was a hostage of the Vanir. The whole Asir-Vanir war.
Mhm.
That is a whole subject in and of itself, which is somewhat well attested and somewhat not. Like, there's some readings in the poem called Völuspá, which you could interpret as either them fighting each other or them fighting with each other as allies. Snorri took the latter part. Snorri took the former part, which is he saw them as conflicting. But the Old Norse itself is actually ambiguous there. There's some others. Umir is pretty much after the creation of the cosmos. Umir is done. Jotnar are not beings that you mess with in Norse mythology. They represent sort of a primal chaos, if you will. There is one. I can't remember the name of the saga, but there is one saga in which this Viking is about to fight this huge battle. So what he does is he goes and he sacrifices his child to a Jotnar, to a Jotun, and the Jotun comes and wipes out the entire enemy fleet. But other than that, you don't generally deal with Vikings in mythos unless Thor is killing them. Also, about land rights. So Landvættir are seen as like sort of these spirits that I personally think kind of, because originally, as far as I can tell, the original sort of Viking traditions, as original as sort of you can get, was animistic. And you see this within ideas like the Furgja, which is a whole other topic in itself that would take too much time to go into. I'm trying to think of specific corrections. I know there was some mix-up in like who the Aesir were and who the Vanir were.
Yeah, I do have a problem with that. I know that, yes.
Like Freyr is a Vanir.
Was the different types of the Jotnar. Because, and I'm not sure, okay, are elves and dwarves basically the same thing or not? I mean...
So this is where we get into some of the complexities of dealing with a tradition that had pretty much evolved over a couple hundred years. There seems to be there is a distinction. So the Ulf and the Alf were seen as more beings that could bring you good fortune or give you an illness, like a direct sickness. The Divigar, which is what their word for dwarf, they were seen as living under rocks and in caverns and in caves. More so. So that would be the difference there. And also, when we come and talk about the 9 worlds, it's kind of a bit of a metaphysical 9 worlds. The Norse themselves didn't strictly have like our sense of cosmology that we have today. Like, we know about Pluto, Jupiter. They're not 9 like literal worlds. They're like sort of 9 different
planes, aren't they?
Yeah, 9 different planes would be probably the best way to describe them, which you could theoretically traverse via meditation and other stuff. And this is just like a very brief, broad overview of Norse mythos as sort of a religion.
And let me jump back in here. I did promise the audience that I would be in Discord for a half hour, 45 minutes after, and I need to be able to wrap that up by not too long after 10:30. So I'd like to start wrapping this up so I can get over there. Plus, I don't necessarily. I've been part of many hangouts that have gone 4, 5, and 6 hours, but for my money, the ones that are 2 hours or less are the best ones, for folks to be able to consume after the fact. And I would like to ask you, Calon, that if you get an opportunity to watch this back, if you or any other polytheists that are listening to this or watch it in the future, please feel free to put any corrections that you come across in the comment section, because I'm sure that Jerry, Misha, and anybody, myself included, does not mind being corrected. They want to be giving out good information. So,
yes. And by the way, go ahead.
I'd love to see a polytheistic hangout.
Yeah. John, you didn't warn us that you would have a real expert on here with us. We thought we would be able to fake our way through it.
Well, look, here's the thing: is Calon brings it, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and
Nice job.
Yeah, when it's
paganism is a religion that comes with a lot of homework.
Well, and here's the thing too: is she's a co-host of a channel called Polyology, so go figure, So she has
6 times in a row. Polyology.
Yeah, really. Say that like 5 times fast. No.
Polyology.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers. All right. So let's give folks their final words here. Let's go to the folks with 10K subs, Digital Hammurabi. Do you have anything that you have coming up that you'd like to show?
We have a bunch of interviews with PhD students and professors on like a wide variety of topics. I'm talking to the head of the Palestinian Exploration Fund week after next. Everything that I have scheduled is on our calendar. If you go to digitalhammurabi.com/calendar, that will give you, I think, through November, everything we have currently on the books.
And I am prepping my series on apocalyptic genre.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be fun.
And
like Ragnarok.
Christian
apocalyptic genre.
Okay.
But unfortunately, and we have 2 interviews with our scholarship students. We run a summer scholarship for PhD students that's entirely crowdfunded. So we are having 2 of them back on to tell us what they did with the money, how their research is progressing. And in the near future, we're going to be starting fundraising for summer 2020. So yeah, keep your eyes open.
And Nakasushi did already put everybody's channel link in the video description. I will put a pinned comment in the comments that'll give some other ways to reach these folks. I believe all of us are on Twitter and what have you.
And so, if I could, John,
go ahead.
If you haven't gotten your Raging Atheist 100% reprobate shirt yet.
Oh, nice.
You definitely need to get that.
Well, and the inspiration for that shirt was in the live chat earlier tonight. Cupcake himself, and I decided to get rid of him just because he was irritating me. And
good reason.
So, Calon, anything coming up on Polyology that we should know about?
There will probably be a little bit of a rebranding because we had some security issues, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
But there's going to be a lot more content coming out, especially concerning Hellenism and heathenry.
Oh, Hellenism as in Greek, right?
Yes, as in the Greek traditions, which we actually have quite a plethora. Compared to basically the way it goes is we have virtually nothing for the Celts and the Slavs. For the Norse, we are lucky enough to have the Eddas and toponyms. For the Greeks and the Romans, though, we have quite a bit more. Though there are still some limitations there.
And you're
because if you choose to add in Zeus's love life,
well, that'll get the ratings up.
Yeah.
And Calon, your co-host is a Hellenist.
Yes, Aliakai.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Aliakai is a Hellenist. All right, and last but not least, History Unsettled, Jerry and Misha. Anything on the horizon for you folks?
Before we jump into that, I just want to mention one more thing to our audience, which is, folks, we've just scratched the surface on that Norse mythology. There is so much out there. There's so much we didn't talk about. It's out there.
It's exciting. It's beautiful.
I think Calon will back me up on that. I wasn't wrong on that one. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Yeah. A lot of it is also outside of the Eddas. A lot of it is in the sagas as well as some of the skalds, actually, because we do actually have some of the surviving skalds.
Oh, nice.
I did not know that. I am my ignorance is showing. So
A
what
lot
do we
of
have
it is-
coming up?
Oh, sorry. Go on.
What do we have coming up on History Unsettled?
Well, we're finally able to start back into production. I'm sorry, I can't talk anymore.
We
My
have been
throat's gone.
then I'll take over because I like to talk. I talk too much, I know that. But we've been kind of on a hiatus for the summer between just weird things with work and other conflicts. We've got a series of shows coming up on Rome and a big discussion that I'm looking forward to, which is comparing the Roman Empire with the Roman Republic and the question of,
Yeah.
was the Roman Empire really that much worse? And obviously it depends on who you ask. For the slaves, for many people,
It's always bad.
but the
For the
relation.
paired we.
Yes. So that's a
It
series
also-
of probably 3 or 4 shows we're going to start doing probably on Wednesday nights. Hopefully later this month we'll do some shows on that.
Oh, you're gonna compete with my weekly broadcast on Raging Atheists, huh?
What time's your night? Your thing at 7:15?
I'm just messing with you, man. No, you. I'm no competition for you anyway. So,
We get 20 people watching us.
well, hey.
20 is good going. We
That's a
don't
good
get
point.
much more than that watching live streams.
Yeah, and here's the thing too. As far as any of the folks that were here tonight, okay, if you weren't part of the first 10,000 on Digital Hammurabi, what are you waiting for? Get over there and subscribe.
Someone
Keep an
did
eye on that.
actually. Sorry, John. Someone did remind us during our last live stream that once once we hit 15,000, Josh has promised to get a tattoo.
I thought I said 50,000.
Oh, he thought he said 50. Let's get to 15,000 and see what happens.
Now, do the fans get to pick what the tattoo is of?
They don't.
And
because
where?
I have to look at it for the rest of my life. So
Well,
I will be choosing it.
Well, so here's the thing. Has anybody ever seen, there's a reality show, what is it, like Joker something, where they do pranks on one another? I forget what it's called.
Like Jackass?
No, this is something that was on
The Carbonaro Effect?
It's on the same channel as that. It's like, but they pull pranks on one another. And one thing was this guy lost like the episode or whatever. And so they had to, there's a punishment they have to do. And so the punishment that they chose for this guy is he had to get a tattoo. He couldn't watch them put the tattoo on. He couldn't know what it was until it was done and unveiled. And what the guy did was he made the tattoo artist put a tattoo of Jalen Smith on his thigh, which is Will Smith's son. Jaden Smith, yeah. But at any rate, apropos of nothing, someone mentioned tattoos and it made me think of it. But and then go over and sub to History Unsettled. They have a lot of great content over there in their library already. And as I said, they have some things coming up. And go over there, and here's what you do. Go over to Polyology, sub to them right now. Then when they do their rebranding, you'll already be a sub, and you won't have to worry about, looking for any kind of new name or anything like that. As I said in the beginning, myself, Saturday, I'm going to have Anger Spread Thin on. She's going to be my feature channel of the week on the GDC. We're going to be doing an afternoon stream to accommodate folks from UK and Europe. It's going to be a European invasion for that stream. And then Sunday afternoon, my guest on the Amateur Conversationalist is going to be Dragnot Silvis. I'm not sure yet what we're going to talk about. And next Wednesday, right back here on A Raging Atheist. I always try and close all of my streams with a quote. I found this. I don't know how apropos it is. Do not shun the mead, yet drink moderately. Speak sensibly or be silent. None will hold you to be uncivil if you retire to bed early. Odin, have them all 19. Remember, folks, be the conversation.